China wants Taiwan badly. For this aspiring superpower, the nearly 14,000 square mile piece of land in the Pacific is more than just an island. It's a symbol of unfinished business, a piece of history Beijing refuses to let go. For China's President Xi Jinping, the unification with Taiwan is the essence of the country's rejuvenation, and this rejuvenation has a deadline, 2049, the centennial of the People's Republic of China. But here's the problem: Taiwan doesn't share the same goal. Far from it. For this country in East Asia, also known as the Republic of China, this matter is also about power and pride, as well as cold, hard economics. So Taiwan isn't exactly a golden prize waiting to be claimed. It's a loaded bear trap, ready to snap shut. And for Beijing, trying to take it will be like walking into quicksand. One misstep and the consequences could be catastrophic. So catastrophic that Taiwan could be China's ultimate undoing. Here's everything you need to know about the so-called Taiwan trap, a geopolitical powder keg that could reshape the entire world. Let's start with what actually makes Taiwan a trap for China. After all, we're talking about a colossal power trying to take on a small island. But if it were as simple as it looks on paper, Taiwan would already be under Beijing's control. But the truth is, the deeper you dig, the more dangerous the Taiwan trap becomes. Let's peel back the layers. First, the practicality of invading Taiwan. On the surface, China looks ready to invade. The massive investments in advanced military technology and a substantial defense budget that keeps on increasing by over 7% year after year make the country look like a Goliath compared to Taiwan. But most of us know how the David versus Goliath battle ended, and in this scenario, Taiwan's sling is the Taiwan Strait. Now, amphibious invasions are already some of the toughest military operations to pull off. Throw a narrow, treacherous waterway like the Taiwan Strait into the mix, and you've got a challenge on a whole new level. At its narrowest, the Taiwan Strait is about 81 miles wide. This width might make it seem manageable, but in reality, this stretch of water is one of the most unpredictable in the world. The strait is notorious for extreme weather patterns, including 2 monsoon seasons that make any kind of seaborne invasion incredibly risky. Strong winds, high waves, and tropical storms frequently churn the waters, making the window of opportunity for an invasion as narrow and unreliable as the strait itself. In fact, China could only realistically attempt a landing during a few months out of the year when conditions are slightly less volatile. But even then, there's no guarantee the weather will cooperate. And then there's the logistical nightmare of transporting hundreds of thousands of soldiers across the Taiwan Strait. Now, China does possess the world's largest naval fighting force with over 230 warships. However, moving such a massive force would require thousands of ships, and it would take weeks. Many of these ships will be vulnerable to Taiwan's missile strikes, especially civilian vessels pressed into service to supplement China's military ships. These vessels are slower and harder to unload, making them prime targets for Taiwan's defense systems. And with each crossing taking hours, Taiwan would have ample time to hit these ships while they're still in open water. Even if China somehow manages to get troops ashore, there's another problem. The country would need to land around 400,000 soldiers in a very short period to stand any chance in Taiwan. For comparison, the Normandy invasion in World War II involved roughly 130,000 troops on D-Day, and that was across much more hospitable terrain. China did test this crossing through military exercises, but it did so on a much smaller scale. Plus, none of these exercises can come close to simulating the scale and complexity of a full-on invasion. The amphibious fleet of the People's Liberation Army simply isn't built to handle such a massive operation. If China's invasion force failed to get enough troops ashore quickly, it would spell disaster before the operation even got off the ground. However, crossing the Taiwan Strait isn't the only obstacle these troops face. There's also the issue of actually landing these troops. After all, Taiwan wouldn't exactly roll out a welcome mat. Taiwan's west coast may seem like the best bet for a landing, since this is where most of the island's population and major cities are located. However, there's a catch. The waters around Taiwan's shores are incredibly shallow, making it tough for larger ships to anchor close to the coast. This would force Chinese troops to set up a landing far from the shore, giving Taiwan enough time to target those ships with missiles and artillery. Naturally, such an attack would slow the invasion before it even started. Think of it like trying to drive a tank through an open minefield. Everything is vulnerable, and there's nowhere to hide. If that wasn't enough, Taiwan's east coast is just as hostile. It might look inviting from a distance, but it's practically a natural fortress, with cliffs so steep they're impassable for large armies. And the few narrow passes that lead inland, they're bottlenecks that Taiwan's defenders can hold or destroy with ease. In short, Taiwan's geography heavily favors the defenders, making any Chinese landing a bloody, costly affair. The The same description can be used for potential Chinese advances beyond the beaches. The island's mountainous terrain, with peaks reaching over 12,000 feet, is ideal for guerrilla warfare. Taiwanese forces could easily use these mountains as an advantage, disappearing into the terrain and launching hit-and-run tactics. This would make moving inland slow, exhausting, and filled with danger. The same goes for moving north toward the capital, Taipei. With only a few major roadways and river crossings to use, any Chinese advance in this direction would be an uphill battle. Taipei practically sits in a bowl ringed by mountains. Plus, the Taiwanese defenders would likely choose to destroy any tunnels and highways leading straight to the city. For this reason, the Chinese troops might opt to focus on western ports and beaches near the capital. However, even getting there would be a massive undertaking. But to truly conquer Taiwan, China must capture Taipei. With nearly one-third of the island's population and the Taiwanese government based in the Greater Taipei area, this city is key to Taiwan's sovereignty. So let's imagine for a moment that Chinese forces somehow made it into the city. Their challenge doesn't end with getting to Taipei, far from it. If Beijing's troops were to enter the capital, they would be forced into one of the most brutal forms of combat: urban warfare. As we mentioned, the Greater Taipei area houses nearly a third of the entire population of Taiwan. That's over 7 million people. This makes fighting house to house, street to street, an overwhelming endeavor for the invaders. Moving through densely packed cities filled with civilians and defenders would result in high casualties and tremendous destruction. Chinese forces would face not only a highly trained and motivated Taiwanese military, but also civilians who have spent years preparing for this very scenario. Yep, that's right, Taiwan has developed a network of civilian resistance units and invested in training to ensure even the population can fight back. And the situation would only worsen from there for China. How so? Well, getting hundreds of thousands of soldiers onto the island is one thing, but keeping them supplied with food, water, and ammunition is another. Moving supplies across the strait while keeping vital ports open for reinforcements would stretch China's resources thin, if not outright destroy them. Let's do a quick recap. So far, we've got the geography, the weather, and the natural terrain working against China. Most of these hurdles are out of Taiwan's control, they're just the island's natural advantages. But Taiwan didn't settle for protection from Mother Nature alone. It's also taken proactive measures to build a strong defensive strategy, leveraging the natural geography of the island. But this time it's not cliffs and mountains doing the defending, it's weapons, and lots of them. This leads us to the second layer of the Taiwan trap, the so-called porcupine defense strategy. The porcupine defense strategy is a military concept proposed by American military expert William Murray for deterring and potentially repelling a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. The name of the strategy is derived from the porcupine, the large rodent whose primary defense mechanism is sharp quills that make it quite a challenge for any predator, no matter how big that predator is. Similarly, the porcupine's strategy aims to transform Taiwan into a target that's too costly and too difficult to successfully invade without suffering significant losses. In this defense strategy, Taiwan's quills are small, agile, and inexpensive weapons whose goal is to slow down or incapacitate a much larger invading force. Interestingly, these weren't always Taiwan's weapons of choice. You see, Taiwan's defense strategy was built around the idea of defending its territory with large, expensive military assets such as fighter jets, tanks, and ships. However, this was before China went through one of the most impressive military buildups and modernizations in recent history. China's growing military capabilities, including advanced aircraft, submarines, and a vast missile arsenal, made it clear that Taiwan's conventional forces were no longer enough to guarantee a successful defense. That's why by early 2010, the United States, Taiwan's key ally, started pushing the island nation to shift its focus from traditional large-scale weapons to smaller, more mobile systems. This transition was essential for Taiwan because it needed to develop a strategy that could deal with China's asymmetric military advantages, such as its overwhelming number of troops and advanced technology. Remember, China is the #1 military power in the world numbers-wise, with over 2 million active duty personnel. As for Taiwan, it has almost 10 times less, 215,000. So what are these weapons that shape the porcupine strategy? As mentioned, they are smaller and more portable than traditional weapon systems. However, they're also highly effective against larger, more expensive military units. Think anti-ship and anti-aircraft missiles like the Harpoon and Stinger systems, along with mines and drones. In 2015, Taiwan purchased 250 Stinger missiles and about 800 other types of missiles. By 2020, it added hundreds more to its arsenal, together with drones and radar systems. These weapons are ideal because they can be mass-produced at relatively low cost. For instance, Taiwan can purchase 6 Harpoon systems for the price of one F-16 fighter jet, or 135 Stinger missiles for the cost of a single F-16. This disparity in cost allows Taiwan to cover its territory with multiple layers of defense, or quills, if you will. Besides being more affordable, these weapons are also harder for China to detect and neutralize precisely because of their smaller and more mobile nature. This allows Taiwan to inflict significant damage on the would-be invaders without suffering heavy losses. This wouldn't be the case if Taiwan were to employ high-cost, heavy-duty systems like tanks, fighter jets, and large warships. A single Chinese missile attack could destroy most of these advanced air and naval assets before they could even be effectively deployed. Essentially, the focus on smaller, more nimble weapons allows Taiwan to disperse its defenses, making it difficult for China to target and neutralize all of them at once. The US is so convinced that this strategy is the way to go that it actually didn't allow Taiwan to buy MH-60R Navy helicopters. Ever since the 1980s, Taiwan has been successfully submitting requests to buy weapons from the US government, some of the most advanced weapons the US had to offer. That's why it's surprising when a request to purchase 12 of the US Navy's advanced submarine hunting helicopters for reportedly $1.2 billion was rejected in 2022. However, the reason for this rejection was straightforward. These massive helicopters that can fly at speeds of up to 200 miles per hour simply don't fit the porcupine strategy. So the US believed that Taiwan's defense budget could be better spent on buying weapons like Javelin missiles. After all, the island nation's military budget isn't as high as you might think. In 2022, it was only $16.9 billion. This means that Taiwan would have spent 7% of its yearly defense budget on a weapon that ultimately wouldn't serve it well. A good call on the US's part, no doubt. However, this is far from the only decision the US will have to make in a potential China-Taiwan conflict. You see, the porcupine strategy isn't designed to defeat China's military altogether. After all, Taiwan's military budget simply isn't large enough to match China's military might on a one-to-one basis. No, the porcupine strategy is only meant to buy time, to delay and frustrate the invasion long enough for Taiwan's allies to intervene. Of course, by allies, we primarily mean the US. However, it's important to note that a US intervention in case of an invasion isn't guaranteed. The ambiguity surrounding this intervention has led Taiwan to prepare for a worst-case scenario, assuming that the US might not come to its defense in time or at all. This is why Taiwan has invested heavily in its own defense systems, aiming to withstand the initial onslaught while hoping for any foreign support to arrive. But in the end, Taiwan can't fend off an invasion alone. The involvement of the US or other regional powers is considered essential for successfully repelling any Chinese invasion. So much so that this involvement is actually considered another layer of the Taiwan trap. This layer lies in the implicit calculus of how US and allied intervention transforms a potential invasion of Taiwan into a broader geopolitical conflict. Taiwan's strategy of creating a prolonged and multi-front challenge for China heavily relies on the deterrent effect of this layer. While the US has maintained its doctrine of strategic ambiguity regarding a direct military response, history demonstrates that even the slightest perceived aggression could provoke an uncontrollable chain reaction. An attack on Taiwan might not only draw immediate US involvement, but could also lead to a domino effect of Allied support, escalating into a conflict with consequences far exceeding Beijing's expectations. In this regard, the Taiwan trap can be loosely compared to another famed military term, the Thucydides trap, named after the Athenian general and historian. As the historical record shows, Thucydidean rivalries, where a rising power threatens the established order, often culminate in war, even when neither side initially desires it. Applied to Taiwan, China risks triggering a confrontation with the US by overestimating its ability to deter intervention. Any miscalculation, whether a deliberate invasion or an unintended naval collision, could create a flashpoint reminiscent of Franz Ferdinand's assassination that started World War I. Small in isolation, but catastrophic in context. For China, this second trap raises the stakes significantly. After all, the country's rise depends on avoiding a prolonged war that undermines the so-called China dream of national rejuvenation. This makes Taiwan's reliance on the US and other regional powers like Japan and Australia more than a practical necessity. In reality, this is a calculated element, part of the island's national broader defense strategy. Taiwan might not have the long-range precision weapons needed to strike China's enormous fleet and disrupt its supply lines and logistics, but the US does. And the US has already bolstered its military presence in the region by securing access to bases in the Philippines. This access allows the US to potentially deploy advanced systems like HIMARS to strike Chinese forces from outside their defensive zones. These defensive measures are critical for two reasons. One, they extend the scope of potential US intervention, and two, they reinforce the credibility of a collective defense mechanism that dissuades unilateral action by Beijing. However, China is acutely aware of the challenges posed by this layer of the Taiwan trap. The country's investments in its anti-access area denial (A2AD) capabilities prove this. By heavily investing in these capabilities, China aims to transform the Taiwan Strait into an operational quagmire for external forces, thus deterring any intervention. Ballistic missile systems and naval blockades are designed to dissuade US carriers and ally fleets from even entering the theater. However, the likelihood of US and allied forces targeting critical Chinese assets creates a dilemma for Beijing. As many experts noted, any attack on Taiwan risks escalating to a level that could derail China's economic progress and global ambitions, making it a self-defeating endeavor. That's why an unprecedented global and economic fallout is considered a part of the Taiwan trap for China. You see, China's potential invasion of Taiwan wouldn't just be a military gamble, it would come with huge costs, reshaping both Beijing's ambitions and the global economy. Let's start with the numbers. Bloomberg Economics estimates the economic cost of a Taiwan conflict to be at a staggering $10 trillion. That's 10% of global GDP, a hit far greater than the 2008 financial crisis or even the economic fallout from COVID-19. China's GDP would take a 16.7% plunge, with Taiwan suffering a catastrophic 40% collapse. For comparison, the US would face a 6.7% loss. These figures alone should deter anyone from eyeing military action. But how are these figures so high? Well, for one, Taiwan produces 90% of the world's advanced semiconductors. Without these chips, industries worldwide, from cars to smartphones, would grind to a halt. Bloomberg estimates the ripple effect from losing Taiwan's semiconductors alone could shave off $6 trillion in global value added. But it's not just about the chips. The Taiwan Strait is also a critical shipping lane. Over 50% of the world's container traffic passes through these waters annually. A conflict here could disrupt trade worth $2.6 trillion, according to the world's largest financial newspaper, Nikkei Asia. James Cleverly, the UK's former Home Secretary, put it bluntly: no country could shield itself from the repercussions of a war in Taiwan. That includes Europe, the US, and beyond. However, China would be the one to suffer the most. If China attacks Taiwan, expect a sanctions tsunami. Look at Russia after invading Ukraine, but think bigger, broader, and deadlier for China's economy. China's integration with the global economy makes it far more vulnerable than Russia. The US and its allies would target Chinese banks, tech sectors, and trade. And remember, China relies on exports for nearly 20% of its GDP. Cut those off, and Beijing would face an outright economic destabilization. This situation would only be made worse by other retaliatory measures like import bans, which would undoubtedly follow suit. Now, you might wonder, isn't the global business world dependent on China? Well, to a certain degree, yes. However, businesses can't afford to be caught flat-footed. That's why the corporate world is already bracing for a potential invasion. Companies are diversifying supply chains to reduce dependence on China. A conflict would only accelerate this exodus. Manufacturing giants would flee to safer shores, effectively stripping China of foreign investment, technology, and jobs. Paulo Triolo of the US-based global business strategy firm Albright Stonebridge Group calls the potential fallout astronomical. And he's right. The mass relocation of factories and talent would weaken China's economy for decades. So even if China wins militarily, it loses economically. It would take decades to rebuild the country's resources. Nations like Japan, Australia, and the US would likely turn hostile for generations. Cutting off trade and capital markets would shatter Beijing's Belt and Road dreams. A failed war over Taiwan or even a Pyrrhic victory would also destroy Xi's legacy project, the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. Not even the tightly controlled Chinese propaganda machine could spin such a disaster. And this brings us to the final layer of the Taiwan trap: China's domestic and political risks. Simply put, a costly or failed invasion would shake the foundation of the Chinese Communist Party's legitimacy. Unification with Taiwan isn't just a strategic aim for this party, it's framed as a sacred mission, ingrained in Chinese law and promoted by leaders from Mao Zedong to Xi Jinping. A misstep in this mission would create a narrative of failure, which would potentially undermine decades of CCP propaganda. Just imagine the scenario: a pre-war propaganda blitz urging sacrifice for the ultimate goal of reunification, then defeat. The CCP would scramble to craft a face-saving narrative, likely proclaiming some abstract, strategic victory. Of course, this narrative would probably be unsuccessful, resulting in public discontent boiling over. And just like that, the fuse for internal unrest is lit. Separatist movements in Tibet and Xinjiang, long suppressed, might seize the opportunity to act. Ethnic regions like Inner Mongolia and the Korean-populated areas in the northeast could also rise. External adversaries like India and Vietnam might press territorial claims, exploiting China's internal weakness, blow after blow after blow. Even within the CCP, blame shifting and infighting could spiral. As leadership stability teeters, Xi's grip on power, fortified by his unprecedented third presidential term, might falter. However, the domestic costs of a Taiwan war wouldn't stop at political and economic fallout. They would also devastate China's worsening demographics. China's population is already declining with just 9.02 million births in 2023, the lowest since 1762. A war could exacerbate this trend, as seen in Russia and Ukraine. Sanctions and economic instability could push fertility rates even lower, so much so that a post-war China might stabilize at a fertility rate of 0.7, plummeting its population to 1.1 billion by 2050. But that's not even the worst part. By 2100, China, once the most populous country in the world, could have only 525 million people, a collapse of more than 60% of its current population. Let that sink in. But China isn't the only one at risk. The consequences of a Taiwan war could cascade globally. Historically, war-induced economic distress has always reduced births. That's what happened with the Russo-Ukrainian War. In 2023, for example, births in Poland and Germany dropped 11% and 7% respectively after the economic shock of the war. A Taiwan war involving the world's second-largest economy would have far graver implications. This all means that even a perceived victory in Taiwan would likely mirror the aftermath of Hong Kong's suppression, economic decline, mass emigration, and irreversible demographic damage. Now the CCP might be able to suppress dissent, but it can't suppress these economic and demographic realities. For China, invading Taiwan would be leaping into an economic and demographic abyss. Will Xi take this leap despite all the risks? That's a question we ask you now. Will Xi's desire to cement his legacy push him toward a reckless decision, or will the far-reaching implications of the Taiwan trap be enough to deter him? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Now go and check out Taiwan has a secret revenge plan for China, or click this other video instead.